Good day, everyone. This morning, we will be presenting to you the social learning theory. I am with Maria Victoria Marquez for the subject of Pedagogical Theory and Practice, or PED 701, Saturday 7:30 to 10:30 a.m. I hope you enjoy, and at the end of this, you would learn something. Before we start, we would like to give you 20 seconds to go over these quotations, and please try to think about, internalize all of these quotes. Okay, thank you so much. Um, we really appreciate that. Let's go to Albert Bandura. Most human behavior is learned observationally through modeling from others. And also with Vladimir Lenin, show me who your friends are, and I will tell you what you are. And this one, I also decided to include this because I like this quotation and I think it would be relevant to put this here. It says there, experience is a master teacher even when it's not our own. I know you have a lot of ideas running now in your mind. You have your own interpretation, but at least in some point we all agree that we learned in our social environment. We also learned from others. So we prepared an outline for you to go along with us. So we have the introduction and number 2, social learning theory. I'll be the first part, and then the latter part all the way to the recommendation will be to Maria Victoria Marquez. She will also give you the significance of this theory, the application, especially in online setup, and the recommendation are take-home message for all of you. And for transparency, we put all the reference so that you can go deeper as well. To give you a brief historical background about the transition of behaviorism to social learning theory, 18 to 1950s, behaviorism was very prevalent and prominent, especially in the educational system, because most of the educators believed that learning can occur when there is stimuli and there is a response that acts to the stimuli. And not only that, they also believe that when there is reward and punishment system, learning can also occur. And there's also an idea that when there is repetitive exercises, then the learning can also occur. But these were challenged on many fronts. Their influence waned to the point where today the major theoretical perspectives are cognitive. One of the major challenges to behaviorism came from the studies on observational learning conducted by Albert Bandura and his colleagues. A central finding of this research was that people could learn new actions merely by observing others to perform them. Observers did not have to perform the actions at the time of learning. Reinforcement was not also necessarily for learning to occur. So, these findings disputed central assumption of conditioning theories. There are various approaches to social learning because of that happens to behaviorism to social learning theory. So a lot of hypotheses were tested by the several scientists, experts over time. But social learning is actually based on social pedagogy, which focuses heavily on children's education. That's why the first mention of the social learning's application in regards to children's education was used by 18th century Genevan philosopher, writer, and composer Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He claimed that humans are fundamentally good but are unnaturally altered by society. And another is we from Karl Major, Paul Nathorp, and Herman Knoll. They claimed that the upbringing of individuals is the responsibility of both parents and society. And last one, we have Robert Richardson, sir. He investigated how children acquire values, views, and beliefs, and how and what will be the influence of the parents in that kinds of process. Those findings provide an important foundation for work on social learning theory, especially to Albert Bandura. So who is Albert Bandura? Albert Bandura was born in Alberta, Canada in 1925. He received his doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Iowa, where he was influenced by Miller and Dollard, especially in their book of Social Learning and Imitation 1941. And Albert Bandura believed that the conditioning theories in vogue at that time offered incomplete explanation of the acquisition of performance of pro-social and deviant behaviors. So what is social learning? Social learning is learning by observing other people with the goal of adapting one's behavior in social context. And people typically don't adopt worldviews that make the most logical sense, but we are influenced to adopt behaviors that earns the least amount of criticism in our unique environment. And you know what? Observing others' behavior is it's natural with us because deep within us, we naturally likes to be accepted by others or some point of our lives. So automatically, we observe how others behave and how the consequences are in order to adapt our behaviors. There are four components of social learning. Number one, it's observation. That means we start observing others, how they behaved, how they act, how they talk, how they wear themselves, prepare themselves. That's how we all start. Number two, we assess if that action is self-rewarding, if we did that on our pace, or we also do that, or that if that could harm us or punish us eventually. So we assess, and we also assess based on the environment demand. If the environment likes us to do this, then we assess if that kind of model's behavior is appropriate and would be acceptable to the social environment we would like to be. And number three, imitation. So we start now imitating. That means we do it now. We copy the way they do things, and this imitation is actually doesn't necessarily you are doing the right thing or the bad thing, but as long as the social environment demanded you to do this kind of specific behavior, then you imitate the modest behavior, and then for the sake of the social environment's demand. And number four, the end phase. If you think that is really beneficial to you, that means you now like to identify yourselves as the models you are copying. So what he is, you like to be identified it in yourself as well. So generally, the social learning theory stresses the idea that much human learning occurs in social environments. Also, in other books they called it observational learning. So individuals also learn from models the usefulness and appropriateness of behaviors and the consequences of modeled behaviors, and they act in accordance with beliefs about their capabilities and the expected outcomes of their actions. That is what the social learning trying to point to us. We learn from the social environment, whether it is accepted or not, as long as it's give uh, social acceptance, and in us we are benefited. We are also we also meet our expected outcomes. We did this, so we learn from the social environment. There are four types of observational learning or social learning process. Number one, the response facilitation. Number two and three, the inhibition and the disinhibition. And number four, the observational learning. So what is response facilitation? This type of observational learning, this refers to modeled action that serve as social prompts for observers to behave accordingly. And note that response facilitation does not reflect true learning because people already know how to perform the behaviors. Like for example, have you seen a group of people when you enter the room? They are all looking at one side, and then out of nowhere, you also adapt yourself. You also did that kind of looking at one direction so that you will not be questioned eventually. And that's actually the response facilitation. We follow the social forms so that the observers could in himself would behave accordingly. And are you also familiar with the 1 versus 100 person made by the Japanese social experiment? In that video, if you try to search it in YouTube, there are a group of people going against one individual. So that individual will behave based on that kind of movement so that he would be accepted and would behave accordingly. So he has no choice but to go also toward the same direction. So in other terms, they call it going along with the crowd. The 2 and 3 types of observational learning, I put them together so that you can easily distinguish the differences. When you say inhibition, that means it occurs when models are punished for performing certain actions, which in turn stops or prevents observers from acting accordingly. That is when, for example, that the modeled person that you're trying to copy was punished because of misbehaving attitudes or actions. When you see that he was punished and then he did that kind of action, the observer would also act the same way, so that he later on, if the teacher noticed him doing that, truly he would be punished. So he would eventually behave and not to follow the misbehaving models. And when we say disinhibition, that means when models perform threatening or prohibited activities without experiencing negative consequences, which may lead observers to perform the same behaviors. That means the models performing misbehaving action, but he doesn't receive any negative consequences. So the observer will also do the same thing. He will act and misbehave because that kind of activities or that kind of action doesn't receive any negative consequences. Like the last types of observational learning is the observational learning. Observational learning through modeling occurs when observers display new patterns of behavior that prior to the exposure to the modeled behaviors have a zero probability of occurrence even when motivation is high. So this kind of behaviors is actually happen again without any exposure, without any thoughts or zero probability to the expected outcomes that you like to be copied to your observer. The observer eventually make a habit, a new pattern that could uh, very very observable or obvious to his behavior, and that is satisfying. That's actually what will happen to the types of observational learning for the observer without any expectation or exposure to high probability of motivation. Even though it's high, still the observer make its own way to make a pattern, a new pattern, a pattern that same uh, to the modeled behaviors. So I hope you got it for all of the four types of observational learning. And the next 15 minutes, I'll be giving it to Mom Victoria, Maria Victoria Marquez, and she will explain to us the latter part of the social learning theory all the way to the application and the recommendation, our take home message for all of you. Thank you so much.